In this podcast episode, Melanie Phillips discusses the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict and its far-reaching effects on Israeli society. She explores themes such as the broader implications of Iran's influence, the complexities of anti-Semitism, the historical context of Jewish connections to Israel, and the urgent need for a reevaluation of Western values in light of recent events. Phillips also critiques prevailing narratives surrounding the conflict and emphasizes the importance of understanding the realities faced by Israel today. Phillips begins by delving into the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas, particularly focusing on the profound effects of the war on Israeli society. Since the attacks on October 7th, the atmosphere in Israel has been marked by collective trauma, with nearly every family feeling the impact of violence, whether through loss, injury, or the uncertainty surrounding loved ones serving in the military. Phillips describes Israel as a small, tightly knit community where resilience coexists with deep concern about the future and the toll the conflict is taking on mental health. Phillips argues that the war with Hamas is not an isolated incident, but part of a larger, multi-front war orchestrated by Iran through its proxies, including Hezbollah. She emphasizes that the Israeli population is largely united in the belief that this must be the last war, driven by a determination to prevent a repeat of the existential threats faced in the past. The trauma of October 7 has galvanized a collective resolve among Israelis to ensure that they are never again subjected to such violence. When discussing the potential for lasting peace, Phillips acknowledges the complexity of the situation. While it may seem unrealistic to expect this to be the last war, she suggests that there are pathways to a more stable future. Neutralizing the Iranian regime and strengthening alliances with Gulf states, such as Saudi Arabia, could lead to significant shifts in regional dynamics, potentially reducing hostility towards Israel. Phillips critiques the left's narrative surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, arguing that it often fails to acknowledge the realities of Islamist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. She contends that the left's perspective is shaped by a worldview that sees the West as the primary oppressor, leading to a reluctance to criticize groups fundamentally opposed to Western values. This results in a denial of the violent intentions of these groups and a failure to recognize the threat they pose to Israel and the West. Phillips elaborates on the historical context of the Jewish connection to the land of Israel, countering narratives that deny this connection. She asserts that the Jewish people have a historical claim to the land that predates the establishment of Islam, and that the modern Palestinian identity was largely constructed in the 20th century. Phillips argues that the Jewish presence in the land is not a result of colonialism, but rather a return to their ancestral homeland, which has been misrepresented in contemporary discourse. The podcast also addresses the rise of anti-Semitism in the West, particularly in the wake of the recent conflict. Phillips notes a marked increase in overt anti-Jewish sentiment, with many feeling emboldened to express hatred towards Jews under the guise of anti-Zionism. She highlights the disconnect between the left's moral posturing and the reality of anti-Semitic violence, suggesting that the left's narrative often leads to a denial of the unique nature of anti-Semitism and its historical roots. Phillips discusses the complexities of contemporary anti-Semitism, emphasizing that many refuse to acknowledge its unique nature. She identifies various ideological groups contributing to this phenomenon, including the far left, segments of the Muslim world, and well-meaning individuals who align themselves with perceived oppressed groups, such as the Palestinians. Phillips points out that these individuals often lack a deep understanding of the issues at hand, as evidenced by her encounters at protests, where participants were unaware of the meanings behind the slogans they carried. Phillips argues that Israel is not treated like any other country engaged in conflict. She notes that military operations conducted by Israel, particularly in Gaza, are often characterized as indiscriminate, despite evidence suggesting they are among the most surgically targeted military actions in modern warfare. This discrepancy in perception stems from a broader narrative that positions Israel as the primary problem in the region, rooted in a false understanding of history, particularly regarding Britain's role in the establishment of Israel and its subsequent conflicts. Phillips explains that the portrayal of Israel's military operations often ignores the context in which they occur. She argues that the devices used by Hamas and Hezbollah are not ordinary household items, but tools of war, making their destruction a legitimate military target. This misrepresentation contributes to the narrative that Israel's actions are unjustified. Phillips emphasizes that Israel's right to defend itself is often undermined by a prevailing belief that it cannot do so without being labeled as aggressive. This belief is rooted in a broader anti-Semitic sentiment that views Jewish power as inherently problematic. She argues that this perception is a continuation of historical anti-Semitic tropes which portray Jews as a threat to society. The podcast also delves into the idea that there is a pervasive belief among some segments of society that Jews are the problem. Phillips connects this to a historical context where Jews have been scapegoated for various societal issues. She argues that this belief is unfounded and dangerous, perpetuating a cycle of anti-Semitism that can lead to violence and discrimination. Phillips reflects on the Holocaust, emphasizing the importance of understanding how such atrocities can occur. She suggests that the roots of the Holocaust lie in a broader societal failure to recognize the dangers of unchecked ideologies and the consequences of hatred. A lack of awareness and education about the Holocaust contributes to a dangerous ignorance that can foster anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry. Phillips introduces the concept of fashionable fascism, describing a trend among young people, particularly in university settings, who are drawn to authoritarian ideologies. This attraction is often rooted in a romanticized view of power and strength, overshadowing the historical realities of fascism and its consequences. Phillips expresses concern that this trend reflects a deeper ideological shift that threatens the values of freedom and individual flourishing. Addressing the question of why Jews are often overrepresented in various fields, Phillips attributes this phenomenon to several cultural factors inherent in Jewish identity. She highlights the significance of Talmudic scholarship, which fosters logical thinking and public engagement, and argues that these cultural traits have historically enabled Jews to excel in various domains. When discussing potential genetic factors contributing to the success of Ashkenazi Jews, Phillips expresses skepticism about the extent to which genetics plays a role. While acknowledging studies suggesting higher average IQs among Ashkenazi Jews, she emphasizes the importance of environmental factors in shaping individual success. The historical context of Jewish communities, including their experiences of persecution and resilience, has significantly influenced their cultural development and achievements. In her closing remarks, Phillips identifies a critical issue that society is failing to address: the existential crisis facing Western civilization. She argues that the events of October 7th have highlighted the urgent need for a reevaluation of Western values and priorities. Phillips contends that the West is at a crossroads, facing a choice between civilization and barbarism, and calls for a renewed commitment to the principles of freedom, individual rights, and ethical responsibility.